He was a billionaire who thought money could fix everything, until a black waitress took his son's trembling hand and showed him what love really looked like. The ballroom had stopped. Guests stared as the young boy with braces on his legs tried to follow her gentle rhythm. Clara did not rush him. She only smiled, letting him lead the step, one small movement at a time. From the corner table, Edward Monroe felt something shift inside him. The man who built skyscrapers suddenly could not breathe through the weight in his chest. Because for the first time in years, he saw his son stand tall, without fear, without pity, just a boy dancing, and as the music carried on, a single question echoed in his mind. How could a stranger see the beauty in his child when he never did? The Golden Swan was a world of chandeliers, soft jazz, and polished shoes. It smelled of roasted coffee and expensive perfume. Waiters moved like clockwork, carrying plates of food that cost more than Clara made in a week. She had been there for 6 years. The hours were long, the pay modest, but the job kept her mother's medical bills covered. Between serving tables, she would hum softly, just loud enough to calm her thoughts. Her silver bracelet glimmered under the warm lights, catching her eye like a small promise to stay kind, no matter what the world threw her way. That evening, a private event filled the ballroom. The Monroe family, wealthy, poised, and distant, were hosting a charity dinner. Clara had seen their kind before: polite smiles, shallow words, quick to notice a misplaced fork, but never a tired face. At the center table sat Edward Monroe, the i.e. billionaire himself, his posture straight, his expression cold. Beside him sat his son, Daniel, no older than 10, with braces on both legs and eyes that darted nervously from guest to guest. Clara noticed how Edward kept checking his phone instead of his child. When Daniel tried to reach for his glass, his hand trembled. The motion spilled water onto the crisp white cloth. Guests chuckled softly. Edward's jaw tightened, and a shadow crossed his face. Clara moved quickly, dabbing the spill before anyone could comment. "It is all right," she said gently, her tone calm. Daniel managed a shy smile. But across the table, Edward barely looked up. For a moment, Clara felt a familiar ache, the kind that came from being invisible in plain sight. She straightened her apron and walked away, her hum returning softly under her breath. But something about that table lingered. The boy's quiet apology, the father's silence, the weight in the air that no chandelier could brighten. And deep down, Clara sensed the night was not done testing her grace. Clara carried the next tray toward the Monroe table, her steps even and quiet. Daniel smiled when he saw her coming, his small fingers tapping to the rhythm of the jazz tune playing in the background. She placed his plate carefully in front of him and whispered, "You have a good ear for music." The boy blushed, his face lighting up. "I like the sound," he said softly. "It feels like walking." For the first time that night, Edward looked up. His expression was unreadable, half surprise, half discomfort. Clara smiled politely, then turned to refill his glass. For a brief moment, she thought the night might pass peacefully. Then the laughter started. A group of guests at a nearby table, young investors trying too hard to impress, had noticed Daniel's slow, uneven movements. One of them snickered, whispering something cruel. Another mimicked the boy's shaky hand reaching for a spoon. The laughter spread like a ripple through the tablecloths. Clara froze. Daniel's shoulders slumped. Edward clenched his jaw but said nothing. Her voice came out steady. "Gentlemen," she said, turning toward the group, "perhaps kindness is harder to learn than money." The room went quiet. Someone coughed. The men looked away, embarrassed but unwilling to apologize. Edward stared at her, stunned. No one had ever spoken like that in his presence. Hope flickered for a moment, but pain followed close behind. The manager hurried over, whispering sharply, "Clara, you cannot talk to guests like that. Go to the kitchen until I call you." She nodded and walked away, her hands trembling. Inside the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator and the hiss of the coffee machine drowned out her thoughts. She gripped her silver bracelet, the metal cool against her skin. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Kindness is not weakness, Clara. It is the courage to stay gentle when the world is not. She took a deep breath and looked out through the serving window. Daniel was sitting alone now, his father on a phone call, his small hands folded tightly on his lap. If you were there, would you have said something or stayed silent? Clara made her choice. She stepped back into the ballroom, her limp steady, her eyes fixed on the boy. The band had just begun another slow tune. Daniel's feet tapped nervously under the table, trying to match the rhythm. Clara stopped beside him and knelt slightly. "May I have this dance?" she asked with a smile. The entire room turned to watch. Edward froze, his phone slipping slightly from his grip, and as Daniel took her hand, something in the air changed. Light, tense, unspoken, like the breath before a storm. The room went still. Every fork, every whisper, every sound seemed to pause as Clara guided Daniel toward the open floor. His braces clinked softly against the marble, a fragile rhythm that echoed through the golden light. She bent slightly and said, "You lead, Daniel. I will follow." He hesitated, looking at her with wide eyes. No one had ever said that to him before. The band caught the moment and softened the melody, a slow, steady tune that felt like hope itself. Daniel lifted his hand, trembling, and took a single step forward. Clara matched him perfectly, her calm giving him strength. The crowd stared, not out of mockery this time, but in awe. The little boy who had been laughed at was dancing, leading, shining. Edward Monroe stood frozen beside the table. His son's laughter, pure and bright, cut through him like sunlight after years of shadow. He had spent fortunes building towers, but never built a moment like this. His throat tightened. His eyes burned. The same guests who had mocked the boy earlier now lowered their gazes in shame. Even the manager stood still, no longer daring to interrupt. Clara's voice was soft as she whispered, "You are doing beautifully, Daniel." And he was. His steps grew steadier. The trembling stopped. For those few seconds, there was no wealth, no class, no pity, only music and courage. When the song ended, the room erupted in quiet applause. Not loud, just gentle, respectful. Clara smiled, stepping back to let Daniel take the small bow he had earned. Edward approached slowly, his voice low and unsteady. "Thank you," he said. "You showed me something I should have seen long ago." Clara shook her head gently. "He just needed someone to believe he could." He nodded, unable to speak. The boy turned toward her, grinning with pride. "Share this if you still believe kindness can change the world." For a long moment after, no one moved. The clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation, the sound of money, all of it faded. Only silence remained, the kind that heals instead of hurts. The ballroom returned to motion, but something had changed. The chandeliers still glowed, the silverware still gleamed, yet the air carried a softness it had not known before. Edward. Monroe sat quietly beside his son, his hand resting on Daniel's shoulder. The boy still smiled, the same shy, uneven smile. But now it carried pride. Clara watched from the corner, her tray balanced, her silver bracelet glinting under the warm light. Edward rose and crossed the floor toward her. For a moment, the room stilled again. "You taught me more in 5 minutes than I learned in 50 years, he said quietly. Clara met his eyes. "You taught yourself, sir. You just needed to see through his eyes." He nodded slowly, the edges of his pride softening into gratitude. He turned to Daniel. "Come on, son. Lead the way out." As they left the ballroom, Daniel paused at the door, turning back to wave at her. Clara waved back. the small smile on her face brighter than any crystal light above her. The jazz band began another tune, the same melody that had started their dance, only gentler now, like an echo of hope. Clara looked at the polished marble floor, remembering how silence had once felt heavy. Now it felt peaceful. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping softly against the tall windows. The sound mixed with the fading notes of music, wrapping the moment in calm. She touched her bracelet, whispering to herself, "Kindness always finds its way home." Subscribe for more stories where silence turns into strength. And as the night carried on, one quiet question lingered in the warm glow of the diner lights. When was the last time you saw kindness change someone's life?